Everybody, thanks so much for listening to Fire Breathing Rob. If you're listening to us on the YouTube, please subscribe, like, and share. If you're listening to us on one of the podcast sites, really appreciate that. Also, tell your friends, your family, and anybody else you can. We're really building, and we really appreciate you listening. So we're going to go into an interesting interview, and we've talked about social media, we've talked about tech in general in the past few interviews. So we're really going to dive deep into that and how you become an entrepreneur. What is the mindset behind that? And also a lot of other different things that we're going to talk about in this interview. So this is Eliza Harkins, and she's going to be talking about that and a lot of other things. So Eliza, first of all, thanks so much for coming on. Greatly appreciate your time today.
Oh, no, thank you for inviting me on.
All right. So let's kick this around. First of all, can you tell the viewers a little bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out as an engineer and data scientist, and then I got my MBA from Cornell Tech,
Wow.
which is like this brand new campus on Roosevelt Island that Cornell is doing. So I got to be in New York City. And while I was there, I came up with Kipit, started to develop it there, and then created it as a company after I graduated, and it'll be launching in the fall.
All right. So before we even dive into Kipit, there's so many things that I want to talk about as a millennial myself, and we're around the same age frame, I feel like. So talking about this, what made you want to go into tech in general? I mean, there's so many things you can dive into tech, but what made you want to go into that field?
I think it was something about kind of being on the forefront, as it were. Creating the new and the different from the status quo, I think was like pretty attractive. And as millennials, I think we've grown up with technology, so there's already that sense of familiarity that the older generation doesn't have. And then the newer generation, I don't want to say they don't appreciate it, but because like, I remember not having technology, when I was growing up, and then it only got introduced for me really in my teens. So I still have like really solid memories of like Walkmans and VHS tapes and like all the kind of still like not quite like digital iPhone age. So I think that gives an appreciation for how far we've come.
Again, for people that are just listening, this is Eliza Harkins, and she has just developed Kipit, and we're going to jump into that in just a second. But just moving into technology again, I feel like it's really a male-dominated world, and you can disagree with me with that. But, obviously I, live in the real world, and I think of this as far as a millennial, as far as, we want men and women to make the same amount. We want men and women to be equal as far as, my thinking goes. Being involved in technology, are you seeing the same things? Is this mostly dominated like with men, or are you seeing women catching up?
It definitely is currently still dominated by men. Women have been making progress. I don't think it's enough.
Right.
But it's an interesting field because there's really no reason why it shouldn't be an equalizer. The history of computer science, I don't know if people know about this, but it's actually pretty heavily female oriented. They're like, women were some of the first classical computer programmers, like of what we think of today as a computer programmer. The compiler was invented by a woman, Grace Hopper. So the field really was started by women, and it was only post-war when women started to make a lot of money from it that men kind of caught up and came into the field and kind of pushed women out. So in terms of aptitude, there's no reason why women can't do it because they practically invented the field.
Well, I believe that women can do mostly anything that a man can do. I mean, we see women soccer players that are great. We see women that are engineers that are great. I mean, I think that whole stereotype is eventually, thankfully, dying out, that men can only do things and women cannot, which is great, I think, for our society in general. So we'll move on
Definitely.
to the
You
topic.
double the pool of ideas and
Right.
people, and you include women in things. So in
Well,
theory,
again,
innovation should be twice as fast.
well, men should want women to make as much or even more than them because a lot of men are living with women. They're having kids with women, and they need to make sure that they're making that money so they can send the kid to childcare and schools, and the list goes on and on. So we got to kind of think of that when we are making decisions on thoughts in general. So we'll go into this. So go into Kibit. What made you want to develop it? But even first of all, let's even talk about this. What is Kibit?
Yeah, so it's a device for any bag or suitcase that you own. You just kind of Velcro it in, and it tracks everything that you take in and out of your bag. You put little stickers there. They're about the size of a quarter, a bit smaller. Just kind of slap it on everything. And then as you take it in and out, it reads it. So on your phone, if you're packing for a trip and you're like, have I packed everything? You can just hit scan on your app and it will say like, you've got all these things, you're missing these things. And then if you do try to walk out the door without, say, your passport, it will pop up on your phone like instantly to say, hey, you don't have this item that you need.
Can we
So
use
there's
that
that
for
like
cell phones and car keys too?
yeah, there's actually like a buzzer built into it too, so that if your whole bag starts beeping at you, that means that you've probably forgotten your phone.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, I laughed at that because I always, for some reason, throw my car keys everywhere and my cell phone everywhere, put it down. And like you said, you can't find it. So I think that's great. You know, even going on trips, this would be a great product for business people or even
Yeah.
regular people in general, Eliza, that are going on a trip, family trip. You got the kids running around, you forget something, your mind is elsewhere, and then you walk out the door and you get that notice on the app says, hey, you forgot such and such. And before you drive 300 miles away, you get on a plane that's 300 miles away. So,
Yeah. I mean, I came up with this because I am very forgetful.
okay.
And then the more people I spoke to, just as you said, travelers, parents, like this seemed to resonate with a lot of people. It's kind of one of those hidden problems in the day that's a stressor, but people don't think that there is a solution to this kind of thing. And I'd like to be that solution.
I agree. There's always a solution. You just got to find the right person or the right uh, object to help that solution come to life. And obviously, you're the right person, and you do have the object to help you develop it and make it come to life. So let's keep going into Kibit. So, first of all, where is the significance of the name come from?
So our tagline is "Keep it together," so it's a sort
Okay.
of shortening of that. And then also, it was very important to me. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Tile. It's a product that does a kind of similar-ish thing to us, where if it's like a keychain you put on your keys, and if you can't find your keys, you tap your phone and it makes a noise, and then you can find it, under your sofa or
No, but
something.
I've heard similar, devices
Apple
like
just came
that.
out with pretty much the same thing this year with their AirTags.
Okay.
So I was, doing my research, and so I Googled tile, and I got like kitchen tiling for the first like 4 results until finding the one that I wanted. So for me, coming up with the company, I was like, it can't be like a real word. Like it has to be, a bit more abstract than that, so that when you Google it, we're likely to come up first.
So then I go to the question that, we all hear about this big tech and how much power they have, Facebook, Facebook owns Instagram. Apple obviously competing against them, Google, and the list goes on and on of all these big tech companies that have either merged together. Even Amazon is
Yeah,
obviously in the
yeah.
tech realm now too. So competing against all these big companies, like I named, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, Samsung, all these companies.
Microsoft,
Yeah,
yeah.
Microsoft. Yeah, I'm gonna forget one, but regardless, how as a small company, as a startup, and developing such a great product for families and also for business people in general, how are you going to compete with these big companies? Because we see Amazon and Facebook, they swallow up these small companies, just pay them off and steal the product, and that's it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the patent process does come into play
True.
with that a lot. We got our first patent. We have our second one under review right now. So that kind of comes into play a lot. And then, the nice thing about being they call it like the first mover advantage, where like you're the first one to come out with a product. The good news about that is that by the time others catch up with you, you can already be on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So it sort of requires constant innovations and creative thinking. You can't just rest on your laurels. You have to constantly be forging ahead, but that's good. And I do have like a vision for where I think we could go as a company. We'll see if it all gets realized. Honestly, at this point, I just want to get us launched, because the pandemic obviously threw everything, people weren't leaving their houses anymore.
Right.
So we were ready to go, but there was no point in launching, if no one was going anywhere.
Can you go in depth? I don't want you to give away any secrets, but how you made the physical product.
Yeah, so when you develop a product, you kind of have to go down two tracks sort of in parallel usually, and then you combine them. So the first track is a bit more design, like how is this going to look? How is this going to feel? How are people going to interact with it? You need fewer like physical materials to do that. So it's usually easier to do it a bit separately. You can kind of do renders and prototypes that don't function, but like sort of look nice, and you can see how they photograph and put them in front of people to say like, how do you like the look of this? Like, would you use this in your life type of deal?
Are we talking about like, sorry to interrupt you, are we talking about focus groups, Eliza?
Yeah, I mean, certainly focus groups, even just more, you can even just do more casual one-on-one conversations to just be like, what does this like look like to you? And, see, sort of gauge people's reactions. With that kind of looks, they call it like a looks like prototype. And with that, I think it's much more to get the feel, get a sense of what like your marketing strategy will be. It's a more kind of creative, as you will, like track. And then on the other hand, you have what's called the works like prototype, which is like not going to look very pretty. You don't want to show it to people, but it's like how the product is actually going to function. And so step one is you kind of just you build it to make it work however you can. So for us, it had to pass certain thresholds of like, will it read the tags in every situation? We use what's called RFID technology. It's what you use if you've ever had like a work badge to like badge into a building. It's that technology. But for our purposes, we had to do like a couple of innovations to kind of push the typical limits. One being that, as I mentioned with the badge, you have to like be very close. You have to and it has to be oriented just right. That's not how people pack. That's certainly not how I pack. I usually just shove everything in a bag.
Right.
So we needed to get around that, and we needed to get around metal interference, which tends to make RFID go wonky. And so we did get around both of those. So we were testing, you know, field testing, people just packing normally and just throwing an iPad in there and seeing how that responded. So it kind of had to pass those thresholds. And then once it's working to the way you like, then you basically have to redesign it to be manufactured, because you want to get it as small as possible and you want to get it achieved in as few steps as possible. So that your manufacturing costs are decreased. You know, if you have something where you have to, say, like solder two wires together, that requires a person, that requires time. So that's going to be a longer production time and more expensive. Whereas if you can use like a spring contact where you just press it, where you just use a machine to press things together and it melds, that's a lot quicker. You just push it through the production line. So yeah, and then you combine, and then at the end you combine the two of them, the looks like and the works like prototype, into kind of your production prototype, like what this will fully look like realized. And then you can do the more robust testing into exactly how people are going to likely respond to your product. So it's a complicated process.
Yeah, it sounds tiring and it's stressful. So I guess the one good thing you could say is that you did have all this time during the pandemic to kind of sit there and get all these you know, the kinks out and stuff like that. I guess that was
exactly.
the one positive. But I want to end with the last two questions. So first of all, when is the new launch date? I know you said it was supposed to be last summer, but obviously with the virus and all this other junk that's going on, obviously it's been delayed. So when is the new launch?
Yeah, so it'll be in time for the holiday season. So in November, kind of look out for us. We're kind of doing a beta launch that's going to be at a drastically reduced price for what we'll launch at properly in 2022. So if you are interested in picking one up, I recommend you go to our website at www.kipit.co. That's kipit.co. And you can sign up for our email newsletter, and we'll be reporting about exactly when that happens. And it'll be limited stock, but like I said, at a greatly reduced price, to kind of introduce us into the world, as it were, even with the pandemic.
So the last question, Eliza, is, you know, leave us with some hope for the young entrepreneurs that are listening, whether they're in high school, college, or doing a master's degree for that matter, or even if they didn't do any of that stuff. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I would definitely say try to make yourself as action biased as possible. I think when I was starting out, I became very obsessed with the planning process, and I was like, what are our exact timelines? How are we going to do this? Which is good up to a point, but I think I started to use it as a procrastination tool because I was scared of like what people would think of the product, and you know, what people would think of the company. So I didn't like actually just launch in and start getting the feedback right away. And I think for technology products, I think it's better to get yourself out there, get in front of people, start getting feedback first. And also just like from a personal perspective, I think you need to build that momentum of doing even small actions, even like just sending that email you need to send. Like if you think about it too much, I mean, how many emails have you just like you've read quickly just to get the like info of the email, but then when you write the email, you're like painstakingly thinking of every sentence to send, and you're much better off sending it, you know, a couple days earlier rather than like waiting a week to send it. So just kind of accumulate those little actions to move yourself forward every day. Like no matter what your circumstances, there's probably some 2-minute task you can take to move yourself forward with whatever idea or company that you have. So even if you have a job, even if you're in school, you're better off spending a couple minutes each day working on it than just thinking of the dream in the future.
Right. Eliza Harkins, again, the product is Kipit. It's Kipit. It's right in backer after you've been watching the interview, so you can definitely do that. If it's Kipit.co, not com, co.
Yeah, we'll get the .com eventually.
Okay. Well, Eliza, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I hope people really listen to this interview, you know, take your advice on being entrepreneurs, but also look into this product because I know personally it could help me. I know it could help a lot of people traveling for business. And again, a lot of people that have families because you got kids or dogs or cats running around and you might forget something.
Yeah,
This
life
makes
gets hectic, you know?
this makes sure that you don't forget the important things you need, whether it's underwear, whether it's a shirt, whether it's passport, cell phones, you need to make sure you get everything in that bag. So again, Eliza, thanks so much for your time. Let's definitely have you on right before the launch and, you know, we get this out again.
Oh, great. Yeah, absolutely.